Hello friends, welcome back to Aunt Debbie's Boutique for day 2, block 2 of our sampler quilt that we're making. And I am using this Buzzworthy by Canvas Studio. I've got 2 layer cakes, which are 10-inch blocks. And I probably won't even use one of them, but I have 2 in case I need it. And I have a 10-inch layer cake of white Kona cotton solids for our background. And I'm using those because I had them in my stash. Yardage would probably be cheaper to use, but I don't have any idea. It depends on which fabrics you choose for what as to how much fabric you'll use. But I invite you to join me each day and make the simple block that we have, and we will put it all together and have a really nice quilt in the end. So for today's block, first of all, let me show you the block we did yesterday. Thought that was a pretty block. And for today's block, what we need is 8 3-inch background squares. We need 4 2.5-inch background squares. We need 8 of a dark background square. Then we need, and they're 3 inches, I'm sorry. Then we need 12 of a contrast, and these are 2.5-inch squares. And then we need a third color, and we just need 4 2.5-inch squares. And this is the way they're going to be layered on the quilt. And so I went back to a dark fabric for that. You should starch and iron all your, or I recommend you starch and iron all your blocks ahead of time, all your pieces. It's really best if you just take your fabric and starch and iron it, or I use Best Press. It's a starch alternative. It's not nearly as heavy as starch, and I don't know what starch alternative means, but it works really well. And the 2 things that are most important for getting a nice, perfect block when you're through is accuracy in cutting and accuracy in your seam allowance when you're sewing. So we want to pay special attention to that. And that's why I recommend that you use a ruler and a blade instead of just scissors to cut these out, because you'll be much more accurate if you do that. Now I'm gearing this towards beginners, so if you are more advanced than that, this may go a little slow for you, but this is for the beginners. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take 8 30-inch, 3-inch background squares and our 8 dark fabric background squares, and we're going to make half square triangles out of them. And to do this, we're going to take our either one or the other, but I'm going to do it on this lighter fabric, our blocks, and we're going to draw a line from corner to corner. And the more accurate you are at that line, the better it will be. So I'm going to do this on all 8 of these. And while I'm doing it, one thing I'd like to say is we all strive for perfection, but we don't get there. And don't beat yourself up if your corners don't match perfectly all the time, because mine don't match. And some of the best quilters, theirs don't match that way. And I think it's a shame that as a society we've gotten to the point that we think it's more important to have perfect corners than it is to provide a gift of a warm blanket to someone, or something that's handmade. So the perfection part of it is just what we do to ourselves. Now I'm drawing with an erasable pen. Once these are ironed, it'll be gone, but it doesn't really matter because they're not going to show. Okay, with right sides together, I'm going to sew all of these by making a 1/4 inch seam, a 1/4 inch from this line down one side and down the other. And I'm going to do this by chaining them, which means I'm going to start sewing down one side of one and then the next, all of them together without cutting my thread. And then I'll start over at the top again and sew down the other side. That makes it go faster, and I think it also helps with your accuracy a little bit. Okay, we want to also make sure we line these up perfectly square. We don't want to get in a hurry and be sloppy about our the way we match this, because even if it's just slightly off like this is there, it's going to change your block and you may not come out with the right size block in the end. So I'm going to pin all these before I even take them over there. Now I'm going to take these over to the sewing machine and sew them. Okay, I'm starting with a leader before I start chaining, and that just gets your stitches started so you don't have that gap at the very beginning where you miss a stitch or two, and you don't have to back stitch. Set your stitch length to 2.5 or 2.5. That's a very tight stitch, but that's why you don't have to back stitch. When you have to rip one of these out, you'll realize how tight it is. Now I want to cut these apart. There'll be 2 threads between each one of them. And I want to cut on that line that we drew. And I'm just going to use my scissors because it doesn't matter how accurate this is. It's on the inside of the seam allowance. So let's cut all these apart. Now I want to open these up and I want to iron it towards the dark side. So I'm going to put the light side down. And of course my iron is not hot. Let's let it get hot. Okay, we won't steam them, but we'll just iron them open. Okay. The light side down. That one sure looks off, doesn't it? I may have to recut something. We'll see. Maybe it was just a piece that was big of one of them. And we've ironed to one side instead of ironing them open because it gives the quilt more strength, especially when it's been quilted on top of that. They will pull apart easier if you iron the seam open. Okay, and be careful when you're opening them not to pull on this. Be gentle with it because this is a bias seam and it will stretch, and we don't want it to stretch out of shape. Now I'm going to move my ironing board aside, and I am going to trim all these up to a perfect 2.5 inches. And I hope none of them are too small. If they are, I'll have to remake them. So this is a 2.5 inch ruler, and it has a 45-degree line on it. And I've put these little stickers on the bottom that are grips, and it sure helps hold it in place. So I'm going to line this up and trim off any excess. And line these two sides up because those are the two I just trimmed, and we just barely shave off. Now, if you're a perfect seamstress, if your seams are all perfect, you won't need to trim anything. But I have started sewing with a scant 1/4 inch, which means just one thread less than a 1/4 inch, because my blocks tend to be too small in the end, ever so slightly. So I would rather trim them up than have them too small. And our final block size is going to be 12.5 inches. All right, I guess my camera shut itself off because it got too hot. I am not impressed with the GoPro 11 cameras. I have 2 of them, and they are different and they have different quirks. And I do not know why this one got too hot. The other one's not hot at all. So I don't know where it shut down at. So I will briefly back up and go over what I did and just hope for the best when I look back at the coverage. We ironed all of our half square triangles to the dark side. Then I took this 2.5-inch ruler, and there's a 45-degree line that I put in the center, and I trimmed them all up so they'd all be exactly 2.5 inches square. And all of our others were already cut 2.5 inches square. This is the layout for our block. And now I'm going to take it over to the machine and I'm going to chain stitch this whole first row up and down. And I'm going to make sure I've got them nice and square and pin them before I go over there. And then as I come back to add the next row, once I've sewn this, I'll open it back up and add the next one all the way down. And I will have to make sure that each time I add a square that it squares up with the one before it, or our block won't lay smooth. Now we're going to take this over to the sewing machine and I will sew them in this order. Okay. Okay, here's our block with all these seams, up and down seams sewed so that we have our separate rows here. Now before we sew our rows together, we need to iron. And we want to iron all of one row to one direction, all of the next row to the opposite, and alternate so that when our seams meet up, one is going one direction and one is going the other. This helps to reduce the bulk. So let's see, I think I'll do this one this direction. And this can be tricky because you've already got some seams that have been ironed and you don't want to mess those up. Sorry, I hit the camera. Some people just finger press at this stage. I like my stuff ironed real good before I sew the next seam. I just think it makes a difference in the final product. And you'll notice these are still connected because we sewed them all at the same time. And I'm leaving them connected because that's going to help us when we put the rows together match up the seams better. Okay, now when I take it over to the machine, our seams are already lined up because that stitch between them when we were chaining our pieces. But we still want to make sure that one is ironed one direction, one the other, and we want our stitching to line up on top of each other. They'll nest and you can just feel it with your fingers where it won't move anymore because it's nested in there. So I like to pin all my intersections. That makes it come out, or I have a better chance of it coming out with my corners meeting. So I'm going to pin this whole thing before I go over to the sewing machine and sew the rows. And then we'll be done except to iron it. right, our block is sewn together. We just need to iron it one more time. And I'm going to iron all these seams the same direction. It doesn't really matter which way you iron them at this point, because we're not going to be sewing anymore to them except when we put them all together. Okay, I see one seam I'm going to undo because this did not meet, everything is scooted over. So I'm going to fix that and I'll be right back. Okay, I fixed it. It looks pretty good. It could be just a slight better right there, but I'm gonna leave that. I'm satisfied with that. It's best when you see a glaring problem like that you just fix it right then, because you'll never be happy with it if you don't. Okay, let's now square it up. It needs to be 12.5 inches. I'm going to put this center line on this line on my table. And then I'm going to put this center line on a line here. Now I want to trim it to 6.25 inches from the center. Well, I'm just having all sorts of problems with cutters today. Cutters and cameras and everything. Okay, I'm gonna flip it around, line it up again on the center, line this one on the center, and it should be 1/4 inch past this line over here. And I'm just gonna have threads to trim off of this, but that's good. That means we did it right. Let's try it this direction. Lining that up, lining these up. A little bit shy up on that one corner. I'll just have to account for that when I put it together. Okay, and there's our block. Look at it on a prettier background. And here's our block from yesterday. And they both are star blocks, but not all of our blocks are going to be star blocks. The one tomorrow is going to be a flower block. Okay, thank you for joining me. And if you'll come back tomorrow, we'll work on number 3. And if you would please like and subscribe, I would appreciate it. Remember, whatever you do, do it to the glory of the Lord. Well, this is future Debbie talking, and if you don't learn anything else from these videos, you're going to learn that I make a lot of mistakes. I get very easily distracted worrying about the camera and all sorts of other things when I'm trying to record, and I make more mistakes than I should, but that's just who I am, so I'll embrace it. I did fix our block. I think it was this one. Yeah. And just know that in the coming videos, it's still going to look wrong because I've already recorded most of this quilt. I just have a couple more left to go. So if you see it still messed up, know that it is fixed, and I apologize for that. It was so blatantly obvious. So thank you for having patience with me and knowing what I mean, not what I do. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.